So let me just explain. I don't, you know, I beg your pardon, I have to go through this because early on, mentions about territorial sea, contiguous zone, have been mentioned. And these are so foreign to our minds. With your indulgence, let me just go through very quickly through all of those maritime jurisdictions. So essentially what that means in UNCLOS, when it codified and rationalized the various maritime regimes. You see, under international law, he who owns the island also owns the sea. Alright, that's a principle. You don't own a sea on its own. Okay? Alright, just remember that. You own the sea because it is attached or appurtenant to an island. It is the ownership over the island that entitles one to also have rights over the sea around it. But the question is, to what extent? Alright, the question is to what extent. And so UNCLOS tried to define that. And so what are these various maritime zones? So if you have a baseline here, all the sea inside are what you call internal waters or archipelagic waters. Alright, I want you to remember the two. There's a difference between the two. Internal water, there is absolute sovereignty. This refers to the rivers, bays, lakes, lagoons. Alright? Archipelagic waters is the water, when you have an archipelago, the water inside that is archipelagic water. Alright? There's a difference between the two. Archipelagic waters, you have sovereignty and jurisdiction, but subject to two main exceptions. Those two exceptions are innocent passage and archipelagic sea lanes passage. That's why we will go back to that later on. Alright, seaward of the baseline actually is territorial sea. Now, before proceeding, as you can see, the baseline is very important. It is, in fact, the cornerstone for purposes of defining your maritime zone. Why? Because it is the reckoning point. When you talk of territorial sea, exclusive economic zone, you always have to start from somewhere, right? And that somewhere is the baseline, right? So, 12 nautical miles from the baseline would be your territorial sea. Here, you have near absolute sovereignty, but again, this is subject to innocent passage, and if you're an archipelago, archipelagic sea lanes passage as well. Alright? And then, you measure 12 nautical miles from here, or 24 from the baseline, that's your contiguous zone. Here, you don't have sovereignty, you only have sovereign rights. Let me just clarify the two terms. When you say sovereignty, it constitutes the whole. Sovereign rights is the derogation from sovereignty. So it applies to specific sovereign rights. Here, the sovereign rights referred to are the enforcement of your law on quarantine, taxation, customs. So those are the immigration. So those are the only specific areas where you exercise your sovereign right. Here, I apologize, here you have complete freedom of navigation, more or less. When I say freedom of navigation, you don't need the consent of the coastal state. Ships can pass through there. But if that ship is in the verge of committing violation of your taxation, let's say a boat loaded of people, then you apply your immigration law. Alright? Alright. Okay, so from there, you go to the sea, another 200 nautical miles. I'm only referring to the water column. Alright? Okay, the water column, there you have sovereign rights only. Sovereign rights limited to the exploration, exploitation of resources. In layman's term, it is only the coastal state which has the right to fish in the area to the exclusion of others. But there is freedom of navigation. Alright, ships can pass. Next, no island floats by itself. There is a natural prolongation. This is the submerged area. This is what Attorney Bagas was referring to earlier as the continental shelf. Alright? This continental shelf, automatically, by virtue of distance, whether or not you have this submerged area, whether or not there is a trench here, you're entitled to 200 nautical miles. Alright? Automatic. Again, there's no sovereignty, only sovereign rights. Sovereign rights limited to exploration, exploitation of resources. In layman's term, it is only you who have the right to extract oil and gas. Alright? But then, if this natural prolongation extends beyond 200, you can still claim this under the concept of extended continental shelf. The difference between the two, this is automatic. This one needs to be proven through scientific evidence. And that evidence will have to be submitted to the United Nations Commission on the Limits of Continental Shelf. This is what Attorney Batongbacal was referring to earlier with respect to Benham Rice. This is the one that we submitted as before May 13. This is the one that had a deadline in 2009. All right? Okay. So beyond this line, the other regime is the high seas. With respect to the high seas, flag state jurisdiction applies there. With respect to the continental shelf, it's the International Seabed Authority which has jurisdiction. Alright? Okay. So just to give you an idea. Next slide. So let me therefore apply this in terms of the archipelago from a top view. If you apply this, and I say this as representational, this is how it will look like. Alright? So you have the baselines, and then you have the archipelagic waters, and you have internal waters, obviously, there also. And then 12 nautical miles, the blue would be your territorial sea. And then the next line, the orange, would be your contiguous zone. And then finally, well, not finally, but in terms of the exclusive economic zone, the white line. And below, in the submerged area, would be your continental shelf. And then if the continental shelf extends beyond 200, the green line indicates more or less the theoretical limit by which you can make your claim. This, in a sense, defines the limits, the outer limits of your national jurisdiction. Why is it important? Because you want to find out to what extent you can apply your law, right? And that's what it is. All right. Notice the difference between the archipelago and the regime of islands. It's a technical matter. I wish to clarify at this point. Under international law, there are modes of acquiring ownership or territory. Okay? Alright. The baseline is not a mode by which you acquire territory. Alright, I just want to make clear. So what are these modes by which you acquire? Remember when in our daily situation, when you buy something, if you pay, ownership over the property is transferred to you, right? So there is transmission of title. If I buy this, I acquire title over this. This is now mine in exchange for the mining. In international law, that's called cession. Alright, that's the Treaty of Paris. Remember, that's how we were sold. Kumbaga. So, the other thing is prescription. In civil law, remember yung mga concept ng squatter, that's why some people stay in the area even if they have no title. After 10 years, if they're in good faith, that becomes theirs. If they're in bad faith, they know that it's not theirs, but yet they remain there for 30 years, it becomes theirs. That's prescription. In international, the equivalent is effective exercise of jurisdiction or occupation. Alright? So accretion, you just put land. These are the modalities. Alright? Baseline is not. Alright? It is not a mode by which you own a territory. UNCLOS only applies not for the purpose of determining who the owner of the island is. It presupposes that if there's an owner to the island, then he is also the owner of the sea, and UNCLOS helps in that. So the baseline helps in determining your maritime jurisdiction, not for purposes of saying you are an owner of this or you are not an owner. Therefore, it doesn't mean that if you are not inside the baseline, you lose the property. It also doesn't mean that if you are in the baseline, it is yours. So in the concept of the Kalayaan Island Group, that's not the case. Alright? It simply means that if you are an archipelago, the appropriate line that you can use is archipelagic baselines. If you're not an archipelago but an island, you use the normal baselines. What's a normal baseline? Normal baseline is the line that you follow the configuration, the low water mark. So when you're in a beach, you see a line, two lines. One line created by the high tide, the other line created by the low tide, right? So for your purpose, if you want to extend your boundary outward, you take the line on a low tide. From there, you measure your 12 nautical miles. That's the normal baselines, alright? Okay, and you just follow the configuration of the island, and there, you can also follow the configuration in terms of territorial sea, etc. Okay? So that's the only difference. So, with respect to whether you lost a territory or not, it's not correct. Alright? Next slide, please. So, in the case of the Philippines, let's look at Article 1. of the Constitution and legal definition as well as geological, geographical definition. When you look at the so here we have an existing baselines before, but this baseline, and this was referred to earlier as 3046, it was not consistent with UNCLOS because there was a long line here, and that's about 140 nautical miles. So we need to correct that also. But I'll dispense with this. Can you? Okay. So what's the whole point? What is the whole point behind the baselines? Time is up, sorry. Okay. So all right. Can I just finish the presentation? Alright. Parang bitin, no? So anyway, this is what we're trying to avoid. Packets of high seas. Without the baselines, when I say the baselines, you have to remember with international recognition. Because if it is a line that has no international recognition, they don't mean anything from the point of view of community. So this is what we were trying to avoid. Packets of high seas within the archipelago. Just by the looks of it, the security and territorial integrity of the archipelago is very much compromised. Why? Because there will be freedom of navigation inside your archipelago. Alright? Okay, so that's what we're trying to avoid. Now, we had an old baseline, that's 3046. Medyo hindi ko na explain. As early as 1960s, we had that. The problem with that baseline was that it never had recognition by the international community. So despite the fact that we had that baselines, then from the perspective of the international community, this is how we look like. And this is what we're trying to change by making our laws consistent with international law. Next slide. Oh, extended daw hanggang one. Bossing or no? Anyway, I know, I'm trying to, kasi, sayang, but, for those who can stay, you can. But for those who are tired already of all the talks and very hungry, I think you should have the freedom to do so. But for fairness, I'll try to go over this, and then we'll see. So anyway, so in the case of the Philippines, therefore, this is how we will go over that now. Okay, so I'll go to the legal now. So if you notice, that was a policy direction that we have to decide. And for 27 years, we were stuck in an analysis paralysis. Alright? And many opportunities were lost. Alright? For all of this, for those who are taking up economics, there is such a thing as opportunity cost also. Alright? In fact, Palmas Island was mentioned. We could have done better with the case of Palmas Island for purpose of boundary delimitation had we done this much earlier. But, that's beside the point. We just have to do with what we have at the moment. Alright, so anyway, in terms of constitutionality, immediately after it was passed, a petition was filed in court. I'm not going to go over the specific points of the petition because that was already discussed by Bagari. So let me jump next slide. So, okay, let me just summarize it in terms of the basic premise of the petition is that it changed the concept of archipelago as defined under the Treaty of Paris. Alright, that's the basic premise of that petition. And as Attorney Bagaris explained, since the Treaty of Paris defined the archipelago in terms of the territorial water as well, when we change, by passing the baselines law, we changed that, and so we were going against the Constitution. Alright? Hindi yata mali, masyado ko yata shortcut. Let me go to the